Newsfirst, NewsLine with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And a very good morning to you. This is NewsLine, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And straight roads do not make for skillful drivers, do they? To discuss this and more in terms of the economy is a youthful economist, and he's right here. His name's Deshal de Mel. Very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
And welcome to NewsLine. Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
And Deshal, you are an economist. We need to ask you various questions. But first of all, overall, what's the overview of our economy at the moment?
So, right now I would say it's a lot better than it was 12 months ago. If you look at back this time last year, we were in a fairly tricky situation in terms of our debt repayments. There was a lot of instability in the economy, and the global economy had lost confidence in the Sri Lankan market. And around June last year, when we went with the IMF program, and then subsequently there were some improvements on the policy direction, there were improvements on the fiscal side, that confidence then slowly started returning. So now there's a lot more stability in that sense, but at the same time that has come at a price as well. So we've seen higher taxes to address the revenue issue, we've seen elevated interest rates again to control the growth of credit and so on. So that will create some kind of pain in this year and probably into early next year as well.
But what does it do to the economy when we seem to have an inconsistent policy or many policy changes? Like, I'm talking about the budget. It's, even the man on the street, who we don't really know, they are all saying, what's going on? Why is this budget being changed so many times? Is it all to be blamed on this national unity government, or what does it do when you have inconsistent policy?
So inconsistent policy is a negative for, say, the investment climate. Investors, one thing they really like to see is to have, a policy that's implemented that will have longevity. So 3-4 years, they know that, okay, this is going to be consistent, and that then they make their business plans accordingly.
Right.
The last budget, I think, is likely to be a lot more stable and a lot more credible than what we had seen previously. So I think I'm a lot more optimistic about the more recent one, and I think the government has learned from previous mistakes. And the key, regardless of, even if you have a coalition government, I think the important thing is that you can have your disagreements. It's healthy to have disagreements internally, but it's important to solve those internally. You come across, you create your consensus. You come to the public though with one, agreed upon view. And
they seem to be having great trouble doing that.
that has been a challenge. But again, I think it's a lot better than it was, say, a year ago. Right? I think previously we had much more kind of reversals of policies, and I think that has reduced to some extent. And
yes, okay. Could one argue that that's because it's more democratic now?
That is, I guess that is one way of looking at it. But I think it's important that that consensus, as I said, happens before you come to the public domain.
We teased the fact that you'd be on the program earlier to a group of our visitors, our viewers. Sorry. And one of them, so obviously they've started sending questions in this morning. And one of them is, given the volatile nature of the global economy and investors' knee-jerk reaction and the flight to safety in terms of gold and dollar reserves, what would be the challenges that an emerging market as Sri Lanka, what would they face?
It's a very relevant and good question. So one key factor is that Sri Lanka has, over the years, collected a fair amount of external debt. And right now we have the issue of paying a lot of that back. Now, as you know, we don't create a lot of external earnings. So our exports have been quite weak, FDI has been quite weak. Yeah. Tourism and remittances has been the one thing that has kind of propped things up in recent years.
Deshal, you're being very kind. FDI is very weak. What do you mean? It's non-existent. I looked at some figures. It was 2014 was $1,600 and something million dollars, and what was it, about 300 and something million?
450 for 9 months last year.
Yes, so that you've been very kind. Do you work in the diplomatic service?
I'm a kind person in general, so.
Okay.
But no, it's a huge problem, and I think the government is also aware of it. There are steps being taken to address it, but it's something that's very urgent. We have to fix it ASAP. But yeah, so because of the lack of those, external inflows, we are compelled to, go back to markets and borrow to kind of continue to kind of refinance our borrowings. When you have capital flight, then it's much more expensive to do that borrowing to refinance. So that is a huge challenge that we are going to face.
And so, as it is, as you say, it's already our borrowings are quite high, and by 2019, it will be the debt repayments will be a huge challenge. How much of a huge challenge is that going to be?
So let me give that context. So if you look at, so this year is good. 2017, 2018 are quite good, all right? But if you look at
in terms of being able to pay,
in terms of having relatively low external payments,
right?
So it's a good time to consolidate, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at previous years, in 2000, even in 2016, we had fairly high payments. Now, 2019, we have estimated about $4.5 billion. Our current foreign reserves are in the range of $6 billion, right? So there's not much cushion that we have, which is why it's crucial that this year and next year we build those reserves and we maintain them, and that should be a top priority.
I see. So what are your predictions in? This is 2 or 3 questions all rolled into one, I think. The beginning of 2015, so let's not mince our words, at the beginning of the change, one left to go into potential retirement, the other starting a new course in his life. And Mr. Wickremesinghe is getting another chance. It'll be the 3rd time Prime Minister, the 4th time now. Anyway, the dollar. 130 thereabouts then. Now the dollar 152 plus. That's a lot of money going somewhere, and it's not helping, is it? What's happened?
It's like this. I mean, the crucial thing with exchange rate management is that it should be in the long term something that works in line with market forces.
Right.
As soon as you start to try to fix it artificially, you create external imbalances, and then you run into external reserve crises.
Yeah.
The way that we have to address the depreciation that we have seen is to really focus on trying to create these inflows. Exports, FDI, remittances and tourism. Those are our main avenues. And as we have been discussing, those have not been doing particularly well other than for tourism and remittances. So that is really the crux of the matter. I think FDI is a massive priority. And they're very closely, FDI is closely linked to exports as well. If you look at FDI that Sri Lanka has received in the last few years, most of it has been to the domestic sector. Areas like construction, tourism, infrastructure and so on. Whereas not a lot of it has gone into, say, export-oriented manufacturing, export-oriented agriculture and so on. So I think that is really what our focus has to be, to bring in these external inflows, and that is how we address this rupee issue going forward.
And there's another question coming in. There's an announcement that the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka will be going to China to attend this One Silk Route concept or notion. How does that sort of help our country? How important is such things?
China is always controversial, right? But it's the geopolitical reality is that China is a key source of capital exports now. So it's like if we compare it with Japan in the late 80s and early 90s, when we saw costs in Japan going up, the Japanese yen becoming stronger, Japanese exporters started moving out, right? So that created a big investment opportunity at that time for Sri Lanka, but we couldn't tap it because of the war. China is similar. China is a much more substantial geopolitical animal than Japan ever was. So it's a lot more tricky relationship to manage, particularly when we need to balance off, with our relationship with India and the US as well. But fact of the matter is, China, major exporter of capital, massive domestic market. So by having an FTA with China and then trying to attract Chinese investment into Sri Lanka, looking to kind of re-export to China using the FTA, I think is a very tenable avenue going forward. But the relationship has to be managed very carefully in a very transparent manner. And it has to be, the international relations part of it is also very crucial.
It doesn't help when their investments in things like the port city is stopped.
So look, with China, I would say that it's up to us the way that we manage those, right? We have good stories and we have bad stories.
Yeah.
So we have bad stories like what you mentioned, but we also have good stories. If you look at, for instance, the extension of the Colombo South Harbour, which is again with 85% Chinese investment, that has been quite a good positive story. We have seen a lot more shipments coming in that are able to, that can use the deeper breakwater that we have there. So it can be good as well, but it's up to us as to how we manage it to look at investments in the right kind of areas.
So which train ought Sri Lanka get on? The train that's being led by Donald Trump in the United States, or is it the train that China is already appears to be on its way and happily going along?
Is it the Donald Trump train going into a wall or something?
Yes, what's happening?
Look, I mean, the U.S. is it's hard to kind of to differentiate between what Donald Trump says and what he can actually do. I mean, you don't know what he will say and what the courts are going to block, right? No, but I mean, the reality is for a long time that the global economic dynamism has really been coming out of Asia in the last few years, right? So China, the ASEAN region, India in its own kind of haphazard way, that's where really the growth has been. And Sri Lanka is in a great position because we are right in the center of that. So we can position ourselves as a major Indian Ocean trading hub. I mean, that's what our history was as well. You go back 2,003, 2,500 years, Sri Lanka was a key trading economy. I mean, we had people from Indonesia, from the Arab states, from Italy. Everybody was in Sri Lanka, but we have become a lot more inward in recent years. So I think it's time that look, we go back to our roots. We go back to being a big, major open trading economy, because that's really where we can create value.
Isn't more than half these problems caused by poor political decision making?
Isn't half the world's problems caused by poor political decision making?
Now listen, Deshal, I'm asking the questions. But okay, really, how valuable is consistency of policy? Is that more important than the rule of law? Is it, what would an investor coming in, and we mentioned earlier that FDI has been significantly, substantially, and perhaps vexatiously down. It's down by an incredible amount. 1,600 million to what, 450 million in the first 9 months. So, which is more important? When an investor is looking at this, he's Googling all these things, he says, oh look, they've got a new government in Sri Lanka, lovely. And then they go and look at this and say, oh gosh, the corruption perception index has gone up. Gone up in a good governance government. That's a little bit difficult. I can imagine what this investor's doing. He's getting them to check this thing if this information's right. So, which is more important? What is important? Is it all important?
I think it's all important. So, investors, as I said earlier, consistency of policy is crucial. Investors hate it when you put down your capital, you borrow from a bank, you invest in the country, and then suddenly they change their rules. They hate that across the board, right? Rule of law is crucial as well, right? It's essential that you're going to be able to secure your property rights and be able to meet your contracts and so on. So those two are, I would say, non-negotiable. Investors then also look for a sizable market. Now, countries like China, India, and even Bangladesh, they can attract investment with their eyes closed because they've got large domestic markets. So people will be like, look, I don't mind paying a 5% cost for corruption and so on in those markets because you can make your money back because those markets are so huge. We don't have that luxury. We have a market of 20 million people with a GDP of $85 billion. Nobody's going to come here to tap that pie. That's tiny. So what we need to do from an investment perspective is to expand our effective market, which is why governments in Sri Lanka since 2000 have been trying to create free trade agreements. With trade agreements, then you're able to basically enhance the size of your market, which is why we need to look at countries like India, China, I would say the ASEAN region, markets like Bangladesh. Those are going to be the areas where if we are able to get free trade access into those, then an investor will be like, look, I invest in Sri Lanka, it's a much better it's a much more pleasant place to live in than say in India or in Bangladesh, but I can get into those markets by setting up here and then exporting. So I think that is the story that we need to go with from an investment perspective. We need to create the right environment and create access to markets.
So I'm going to ask you this question, I have to, because that's the way it is on the show. What do things like the bond do to the economy?
Which bond are we talking about?
Which bond? There's only one bond. There's no James Bond or anything bond. We're not even talking about the bonds of national government. But what we are talking about, the one and the only, the very inimitable central bank bond scandal. 2015, a huge amount of controversy. I think the World Bank has also made note of this thing in one of their internal reports. And not to be outdone and to almost stick a finger up at the establishment, they did it all over again in March 2016. What does it do to the economy?
It's not good. Again, it's a perception. It creates a negative perception. For me, the biggest issue is it's a symptom of a lack of transparency of the capital of the bond market process. And I think if we can address that issue of transparency in that, then you're going to solve a lot of problems. And I understand that the central bank is attempting to do some things along that line, but going forward, that's going to be the key.
The central bank is doing something about it, as they've told us. And continue to tell us. But I've got a viewer who's posed this question, and I quite agree. And it is this: the governor of the central bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, says that this matter has been sent to the police, to the IGP. Well, with all due respect, the last time we heard the IGP on the telephone, the IGP was promising some caller, who was probably a minister, that he was assuring the minister that there would be no arrests made without reference to him, the IGP. Well, the thing is, he said so even before the investigation, even before this person turned up to that dreaded place, the FCID. Well, need I say more? The governor of the central bank is referring this matter to the IGP, the same one who said, well, no, sir, don't worry, he won't be arrested, there won't be arrests made. So, why not just send the whole blessed thing to the AG and get on with it? Because inevitably we need accountability. Isn't accountability essential for this economy?
Accountability is essential, and governance is essential as well. So when you talk about institutions like the police, like the central bank, it is essential that those institutions are independent and that they are run in a competent manner, because that again is a crucial part of the economy also, the whole issue of what you were talking about, rule of law. If you don't have independent and strong democratic institutions, so the institutions like central bank, institutions with the rule of law, and several others, that undermines the entire economic fabric as well. So the key is strong independent institutions in a democratic system.
I noticed that you've worked for some years at the IPS,
yes,
the Institute of Policy Studies. How much, you were there, what, 6 years?
6 years.
Right, so when did you leave?
2010.
Okay, how much of the ideas that came out of the IPS did that government follow?
IPS comes up with a lot of ideas. I mean, they do a lot of good work in a lot of different areas. Governments don't always take these things on board immediately. I think it takes, in order to influence government policy, it takes usually a long time of kind of direct stuff. But I think what's really crucial is to influence the ideas of people, because governments respond to people. If voters start demanding, certain changes, certain, differences, governments are forced to respond to that in a democratic system, in a well-functioning democratic system. So what I would say is that, even for institutions like IPS, it's important to, to try to influence the government and other related stakeholders. But the key change can come once we start changing the way that, voters think.
But we have, at the moment, what appears to be an outspoken chairman of the IPS,
Yes.
Dr. Sali.
Yeah.
But he seems to be saying things that's going completely counter to the government, and it's a bitter sort of analysis that it's a bitter report card, and some people say, well, in a previous environment he may have been white vanned, but is he wasting his time saying all this?
No, he's not wasting his time. I think it's because, again, what the comments that are made by guys like Dr. Sali, which are, again, I think very pertinent comments, even if it won't fall to the government immediately and it's not going to make a change overnight, he does influence the thinking of people. I think it's great if that can be translated into Sinhalese and go into in a broader way of thinking. But I would certainly say he's not wasting his time. I think it's important that we create space for this kind of debate. We have public debate that is able to influence thinking of people in a substantive manner. I think that is crucial.
But Deshal, you represent the youthfulness of the current situation, so on, and of our economy. Does it? And then I'm sure you've got all these businesses, somewhere, but you're in line with technology. What is it? What do you all do? How did you react when you heard the IGP having this conversation with somebody who was clearly his superior, because you referred to him as sir, and he assuring this caller that he's not going to make an arrest. This chap, whoever it was, hadn't even turned up for questioning, and here, what does he do to you?
Of course, it makes you question the credibility of institutions. But again, I think we also try to think of the positives, right? I mean, if you look at the constitutional changes that have taken place in the last 2 years with the appointment of independent commissions for the, in terms of appointment of key positions in these institutions, that's a step in the right direction. So even though things are not perfect and things are not, exactly what we would want to be, direction of change has been positive to some extent, volatile. But look, I'm somebody who tries to take a positive outlook in whatever we do, right?
How much of a positive outlook, Deshal, can you take when we have got the BOI? So you got a supposedly one-stop shop. Then you've got something lurking around the corner. It's called the Agency for Development. So who's doing what? I mean, I rather pity a foreigner coming here looking for investment, because this chap's going to be lost even before he gets out the Hilton.
So this is something that's been going on in Sri Lanka for a long time, right? So what happens is we see that when a new government comes in, they see institutional failure, and then they try to create an agency that kind of supersedes the existing structure, and the existing structure remains. Nobody tries to fix the existing structure, right? So what we really need, look, if you look at our government resources, they're really spread too thin. We have 1.3 million public servants, and that costs a huge amount of money, right? It makes a lot more sense to me to have a much slimmer government, but be able to then pay people appropriately to get the correct kind of talent and to be able to make it much more manageable. But we don't do that.
The governor of the central bank paid 70,000 rupees a month.
There we go. But that's a problem.
A housekeeper earns 30,000 a month.
Yeah, so it's problematic. We have our
driver earns 25 to 35, plus. A minister showed me a wage slip of one of his drivers. He got over, in that month that he showed it to me, over 89,000 rupees.
He should become the governor of the central bank.
He should become the governor of the central bank. Good idea. Well, but then you do have governors who spend, 66 million in the space of 17 months, including, of course, that wonderful purchase, and which I shall always be etched in my memory, Pampers on the central bank credit card. there's a whole new style to this form of governance. But really seriously, what do concessions do to the economy?
So if you're talking about investment concessions,
Yeah.
The reason why Sri Lanka has historically had to do that is to compensate for our weak investment climate.
Yeah.
So during the war and even subsequently, investors are, their costs of coming into a country like Sri Lanka are quite high. So to compensate for that, we've always had to give these high levels of concessions. Most of those are tax concessions.
Indeed.
And that has resulted in huge leakages in government revenue.
Yeah.
And the problems that we have faced as a result of that have been quite significant. Revenue to as a percentage of GDP in Sri Lanka is among the lowest. Started improving last year. Hopefully that will continue. But these investment concessions are very problematic in that sense.
Yeah.
The key then is to fix the problem, our investment climate. If we address our investment climate, make it easy for investors particularly in terms of access to land, in terms of speed and efficiency of approvals, access to talent, we address those kind of issues, then you're going to have less onus on these concessions. And I think that is the way forward in terms of our investment strategy.
Does it help when, in the 19th Amendment, there was an attempt by government to take over or to transfer the powers from the presidency to the Prime Minister under some guise of reducing the powers of one. But then what's the point when somebody else, in this case the Prime Minister, would have ended up with those powers? So just transferring it from President's house to temporary.
Yeah, I think it's important to have checks and balances, but I think it's more important to have powers or checks and balances amongst institutions than concentrated in one or two individuals. Yeah. And I think that is, like, say, for instance, even in America, what we are seeing is that even though an individual like, say, Donald Trump would want to kind of make changes, he's finding roadblocks in the institutional structure that democratic system has. Yeah. So in Sri Lanka, I think it makes sense to dilute power from individuals, but it's also important where that goes.
Indeed. One of our viewers is obviously paying close attention to this. It says that if the governor of the central bank gets only 70,000 rupees, it would be interesting to find out how much Mangalayappa, the managing director designate of the Agency for Development, gets, and how it is that on 70,000 rupees, I don't know. I think his bank manager will have to call him in and have a chat, because when you're earning 70,000 and you're spending 36 million plus on the credit card, and you're repaying 12 million, the Indian Revenue Commissioner will want to know, will want to hear from you. But in actual terms, they probably earn over 1 million rupees a month. But even then, that might not be enough. How do you think there's a case to go sort of Singapore's route, where you pay the politicians and all these government people lots of money, but then expect you to deliver and avoid corruption?
I think that's the key. It's accountability, right? Regardless of how much money you're paid, you need to be accountable in what work that you do.
Right.
An interesting comparison of that is the Sri Lankan passport department, where it used to take several weeks to get your passport renewed.
Yeah.
As soon as they introduced a higher fee and then one-day service, we were able to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a question of what we can't do, but we need to create the right kind of incentive structures that are going to incentivize government action. So it's not just pay, but it's also things like having well-defined KPIs and having your promotions, your progress, your career progression linked to that to some extent. Once you start bringing those changes in, then you're going to see more efficiency in the government service. I think accountability is the real key there.
The real key. Time for predictions. The last minute or so. The dollar. Why don't you tell us what will happen by 2019?
2019, tough one.
When we have to pay out so much of money.
So I'll tell you by 2018, I'd expect the dollar to still be within about 150 to 158.
Right.
That's like 4% depreciation.
Yeah.
That's for 2017. Beyond that, it's a bit tough to make a call. I do not have my astrologer's hat today.
Right.
But look, if you look at this year, really it's going to be the external forces that are going to determine our dollar flows. The way that capital markets move depending on particularly on the growth of the American economy. If you see the Federal Reserve raising rates at a faster pace than what is being expected right now, you're going to see capital flight. And then that's going to cause outflows from Sri Lanka's capital market, and that's going to be tricky for us. From a export and import side, it will be, I think, fairly range bound. You're not going to see dramatic growth in exports.
Yeah.
If GSP Plus comes in April, then second half we should have some kind of positive momentum there, but again, not a game-changing level. Imports, I think, will be quite subdued this year because you're going to see quite fairly tight domestic demand conditions.
Well, a couple of notes. Our viewers are hot on our case this morning. They say it's not the governor who's earning $1 million or nearly $1 million a month. It's more likely that the managing director designate Mangalayappa at the Agency for Development who probably is making that. Thank you, viewer. And another viewer says, if, I don't know, this question is posed to you, okay? If Ranil is removed, we will do well in 2018. Jai Weber to Sri Lanka. Do you agree?
I'm not going to comment on that stuff.
You can't comment on that stuff. That's a good answer. But you've had a good time this morning talking about economy and so on.
It's been fun.
And we wish you well on your economic journey and hope that you will help guide and shape the fortunes of this country and its people. Deshal de Mel, thank you very much for being on Newsline. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you can listen to Deshal in your car on Yes FM 101, just before the news at 7:55. On that note, thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you same time, same place tomorrow morning. In the meantime, take care and God bless.